I wasn't supposed to be home until Thursday. The project in Seattle wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule, and by the time the last inspection report was signed off, there wasn't much reason for me to stay. I booked the red-eye, slept maybe 40 minutes somewhere over Nevada, and landed in Phoenix just before sunrise. At 6:50 a.m., I unlocked the front door of our house. The air inside was still and cool. That quiet early morning kind of silence where the neighborhood hasn't fully woken up yet. I set my travel bag down beside the stairs and listened for a moment. Then I heard the shower running upstairs. For a second I assumed Sarah must have taken the morning off work. She usually left the house by 7, but maybe something had changed. I walked up the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the railing the way it always did when I came home after a trip. The routine was familiar. Suitcase by the door. Shoes off at the mat. Quiet climb upstairs so I wouldn't wake her if she was still asleep. But when I stepped into the bedroom, something small caught my eye. 2 wine glasses sat on the nightstand. One had a faint red lipstick mark along the rim. The other was clean. I stood there looking at them for a long moment. I don't drink wine. Never have. Sarah knew that from the day we met. I'm more of a beer or bourbon guy, and even then only occasionally. The shower kept running in the bathroom. Steam drifted slowly under the door. I didn't touch the glasses at first. I just looked at them, the way you study something simple when your mind is trying to catch up with what your eyes already understand. Eventually, I picked one up, turning it slightly in the morning light coming through the window. Then I set it back exactly where it had been. The water in the bathroom shut off. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Sarah stepped out wrapped in a white towel, her hair wet and dark against her shoulders. She froze when she saw me standing in the bedroom. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then her eyes moved slowly toward the nightstand, toward the 2 wine glasses. And that was when she understood that I understood. My name is Ethan Reed. I'm 36 years old, and I work as a technical consultant for a construction engineering firm based out of Denver. The job isn't glamorous, but it pays well, and it keeps projects from collapsing before they're finished. Most of my work happens where problems start showing up. A structure running behind schedule. A site where the numbers don't match the plans. A contractor claiming one thing while the inspections say something else. I fly in, spend a few days or a few weeks reviewing everything, and then I write a report explaining exactly where things went wrong and how to fix them. It's a quiet kind of work. Observation, documentation, patience. Over the years, I learned that most problems reveal themselves slowly if you pay attention long enough. That job kept me on the road more than most people would probably tolerate. Some months I was home half the time. Other months it was closer to a few days here and there between flights. But Sarah and I had built our routine around that rhythm. 2 weeks traveling, 3 or 4 days home, then another project somewhere else. It worked. At least, that's what I believed. Sarah worked at a marketing agency downtown. She handled account management for corporate clients, which meant presentations, networking events, and a lot of carefully managed appearances. She was good at it too. Organized, confident, always aware of how things looked from the outside. That had always been one of the things I admired about her. Where I focused on systems and numbers, Sarah understood people. She could walk into a room full of strangers and know exactly how to guide a conversation where she wanted it to go. We had been married for 7 years. No kids yet, though the conversation had started coming up more often during the past year. Usually late at night, when we were both half asleep and talking about the future the way people do when everything still feels stable. We bought the house 4 years earlier, a 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of Phoenix. Nothing extravagant, just enough space for 2 people who spent half their lives packing suitcases. Most of the furniture had been Sarah's choices. Neutral colors, clean lines, everything arranged in a way that made the house feel calm and deliberate. Friends who visited often said the same thing. You two have everything figured out. I never corrected them, because from the outside, it probably looked that way. A stable marriage. Good jobs. A house that stayed clean even when I was gone for weeks at a time. Weekend dinners when I was home. Occasional vacations when our schedules aligned. But when I stood in that bedroom that morning, looking at those 2 wine glasses on the nightstand, the picture I had believed in for 7 years started shifting slightly in my mind. Not collapsing, just adjusting. And once that adjustment began, certain memories from the past few months started returning with a different kind of clarity. Small things. Things that had never seemed important before. Until now. Standing in that bedroom, With the sound of water still dripping somewhere in the bathroom, my mind began doing something it had always done on job sites. It started reviewing the past. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just quietly. Construction problems rarely appear all at once. A beam doesn't suddenly fail without warning. A foundation doesn't crack overnight. There are always small indicators first, tiny shifts that don't seem connected until you step back and look at the pattern. As I stood there, those patterns began forming. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had started buying new clothes more often. Dresses I didn't remember seeing before. Nothing outrageous, just slightly more polished than what she usually wore to the office. At the time, she explained it casually. New client presentations, she said one evening while hanging a navy dress in the closet. The agency wants everyone looking a little sharper this quarter. That sounded reasonable. Marketing depended on appearances. Another memory surfaced. About 3 months earlier, we had been sitting on the couch after dinner when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Sarah glanced at the screen, smiled slightly, and turned the phone face down before I could see the notification. I remember teasing her about it. Secret admirer? She laughed and shook her head. Just a client being dramatic. At the time, I didn't think much about the way she angled the phone away when she picked it up, or how quickly the conversation ended once she walked into the kitchen. There had also been the sudden appearance of girls' nights. Sarah always had friends from work, but those evenings used to happen maybe once a month. Recently, they seemed to appear on the calendar almost every week. Wine bars, late dinners, birthday celebrations for co-workers whose names I sometimes didn't recognize. Whenever I was home during those nights, she would leave around 7, dressed a little nicer than usual, promising she wouldn't stay out too late. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. I never questioned it, partly because I trusted her, and partly because my job had trained me to respect independence. When you spend half your life traveling between cities, you learn quickly that relationships survive best when both people have room to live their own routines. So I gave her space. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Looking back now, standing beside those 2 wine glasses, I realized something simple. Trust had never been the problem. The problem was that I had never stopped to examine the pattern forming right in front of me. Because when you trust someone completely, you stop checking the details. And when you stop checking the details, small inconsistencies can exist for a very long time without being noticed. Until one quiet morning when you come home 2 days earlier than expected. And suddenly every small detail begins to rearrange itself into something you can't ignore anymore. The shower turned off behind the bathroom door. The sudden silence filled the room in a way that made every small sound more noticeable. Water dripping against tile. The faint hum of the air conditioner downstairs. The quiet ticking of the wall clock above the dresser. I picked up the wine glass again and looked at the faint red lipstick on the rim. Sarah rarely wore lipstick at home. That was something she usually saved for work meetings or dinners with clients. Seeing it there, smeared slightly across the edge of the glass, made the situation feel strangely deliberate, like the evidence had been left in plain sight. For a moment, I imagined what the room must have looked like a few hours earlier. The lights low. Someone sitting where I was standing now. 2 glasses of wine between them. That thought arrived without emotion. No anger. No shock. Just observation. I placed the glass back exactly where it had been before. Precision mattered. Even in small things. Especially in small things. My job had taught me that reacting too quickly to a problem rarely helped. The first reaction was almost always emotional, and emotional reactions made people careless. Careless people missed information, and information was the only thing that actually solved problems. Behind the bathroom door, I heard the shower curtain slide open, followed by the soft sound of a towel being pulled from the rack. Sarah was finishing her morning routine. For years, I had imagined moments like this differently. If something like this ever happened, I assumed I would feel a rush of anger or disbelief, that my mind would race or my heart would start pounding. But none of that happened. Instead, something inside me settled. A quiet kind of clarity. Whatever had happened in this room had already happened. No amount of anger could change that. No raised voice could erase it. The only thing that mattered now was understanding it. Understanding meant patience. And patience meant staying calm long enough to see everything clearly. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. A delivery truck was moving slowly between houses. A man across the road was taking his trash bins back toward his garage. The world outside looked exactly the same as it had every other morning. Ordinary. Predictable. Behind me, the bathroom door opened. Steam drifted into the bedroom as Sarah stepped out, wrapped in a white towel, her wet hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She froze when she saw me standing there. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. Her eyes moved from my face to the nightstand beside the bed, then to the 2 wine glasses. That was when the understanding reached her. Not panic. Recognition. She realized that I had already seen everything I needed to see. And in that moment, the silence between us changed. Because she knew something had shifted. And so did I. When Sarah stepped out of the bathroom and saw me standing there, the first thing she said wasn't what most people would expect. She didn't say, "You're home early." She didn't say, "When did you get back?" Instead, she asked, "Why are you home?" Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked either. But there was something sharp underneath it, the kind of tension that appears when someone realizes a plan has just been interrupted. I didn't answer her right away. I simply looked at the nightstand, at the 2 wine glasses. The moment my eyes moved in that direction, hers followed automatically. It was almost instinctive, like watching someone glance toward a sound in the dark. When she saw what I was looking at, the room went completely still. Her shoulders tightened slightly under the towel. Not dramatically, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I started noticing other things. Small details. Details that hadn't registered when I first walked into the house. There was a faint smell of unfamiliar cologne in the air. Not strong, but distinct enough to stand out from the usual scent of our laundry detergent and Sarah's shampoo. Another detail surfaced in my mind. When I came through the front door earlier, I had taken my shoes off automatically and left them near the mat. At the time, I hadn't looked closely at anything else sitting there. Now I remembered something. Another pair of shoes. Men's dress shoes. Dark brown leather. They had been placed neatly beside the wall, as if someone intended to come back for them. I shifted my attention back to Sarah. She was watching me carefully now, trying to read my expression, trying to determine how much I understood. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked quietly. "A minute," I said. That wasn't exactly true, but accuracy wasn't necessary yet. Her eyes moved again toward the glasses, then back to me. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her expression. The same kind of mental adjustments I often saw on construction sites when someone realized an inspection report had uncovered something they didn't expect. People always tried to estimate the damage first. What had been seen? What hadn't? That was when another detail returned to my memory. When I walked upstairs earlier, the closet door had been slightly open. That wasn't unusual by itself. But now I remembered noticing something dark hanging inside that didn't belong to me. A charcoal suit jacket. I walked slowly across the bedroom and pulled the closet door open a little wider. The jacket was still there. Different size. Different cut. Not mine. Behind me, Sarah said quietly, "Ethan." I didn't respond, because at that exact moment, downstairs, I heard something else. The faint sound of the front door opening. The sound from downstairs was small, but unmistakable. The front door opening, then closing again. Sarah heard it too. I saw the reaction in the way her shoulders stiffened. The towel tightened slightly in her grip as she turned her head toward the hallway. Neither of us moved. A moment later, footsteps crossed the entryway floor below us. Slow, confident, not the hesitant steps of someone unsure whether they were in the right place. Someone who had already been there before. The steps paused, then continued toward the staircase. At that point, the situation stopped being abstract. Until then, everything in the room had been quiet evidence. Glasses, a jacket, a smell that didn't belong, pieces of information that suggested something had happened. But footsteps inside your house changed the situation completely. Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Ethan, I can explain." I didn't answer. The footsteps reached the base of the stairs. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Whoever was downstairs must have realized something had changed as well. Maybe they noticed my suitcase by the door. Maybe they heard voices upstairs. Then the first step creaked. Another step followed. I walked out of the bedroom and stopped at the top of the staircase just as a man appeared on the landing below. He was in his early 40s, maybe a few years older than me. Dark hair still damp, like he had just finished showering. He wore a white dress shirt that wasn't fully buttoned yet, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. In one hand, he held a phone. The kind of posture someone has when they come back into a house quickly because they forgot something. When he saw me standing there, he stopped immediately. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked past me toward the bedroom, where Sarah was still standing in the doorway, clutching the towel around her shoulders. That was when the realization hit him. Not confusion, recognition. He understood the situation instantly. Later I would learn his name was Nathan Collins. At that moment, he was just a man standing halfway up my staircase, trying to calculate the fastest way out of a problem that had just appeared in front of him. I studied him the same way I would study someone on a job site when a report uncovered something serious. No raised voice, no sudden movement, just observation. He looked back at me carefully. There was no aggression in his posture, no attempt to explain anything. He simply stood there, waiting to see how I would react. Behind me, I could hear Sarah breathing unevenly. The entire house had gone quiet again. Finally, I spoke. "You should leave." The sentence came out calm and level. No anger, just a statement. Nathan held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. He turned around without saying anything else and walked back down the stairs. Nathan didn't argue. He didn't try to explain or defend himself. He simply nodded once, the way someone does when they realize resistance would only make the situation worse. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. I stayed where I was until I heard him reach the front door. There was the quiet sound of shoes being picked up from the floor, followed by the door opening again. A moment later it closed. The house fell silent. For a few seconds I stood at the top of the staircase, listening to the faint sound of a car starting somewhere outside. The engine idled briefly, then faded as it drove away down the street. Only after the sound disappeared completely did I turn back toward the bedroom. Sarah had moved a few steps into the hallway. The towel was still wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her hair dripping slowly onto the hardwood floor. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but the confidence she usually carried into every room seemed to have drained away. "Ethan," she said quietly. Her voice was different now, softer, careful. I walked past her into the bedroom and sat down on the edge of the bed. The wine glasses were still on the nightstand exactly where I had left them earlier. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "I didn't know you were coming back today," she said. "I wasn't supposed to." "That's not what I meant." I nodded slightly but didn't respond. The silence stretched again. People often imagine moments like this as loud, full of shouting and accusations. But the reality felt strangely quiet, almost procedural. Sarah sat down in the chair near the window, pulling the towel tighter around herself like someone bracing against cold air. "I can explain," she said again. I looked at her for a moment before asking the only question that seemed necessary. "How long?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes dropped toward the floor, then toward the nightstand where the glasses still sat. Finally, she exhaled slowly. 6 months. The number hung in the air between us. 6 months. Half a year of routine flights and work trips. Half a year of normal phone calls and weekend dinners when I was home. Half a year where everything had looked exactly the same on the surface. I nodded once. That was all. Sarah seemed surprised by the lack of reaction. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she asked quietly. I looked again at the wine glasses beside the bed. Then I stood up. "I think," I said calmly, "everything important has already been said." The next few hours passed quietly. There was no dramatic argument, no slammed doors. Sarah dressed slowly, gathering a few things from the bedroom while I moved through the house with the same steady pace I used on inspection days. Routine helps when things stop making sense. By mid-morning, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The sunlight coming through the window looked exactly the same as it had every other day, falling across the countertop and the small scratch near the sink where I once dropped a wrench. Sarah had changed into jeans and a sweater. Her hair was still damp, pulled back loosely as if she hadn't decided what to do next. "I didn't plan for you to find out like that," she said. I nodded slightly. "I assumed that." "You were gone most of the time," she continued. "Work trips, different cities every month. It just happened." The explanation sounded unfinished even to her. I didn't challenge it. People often rush to fill silence with reasons, especially when the truth is simpler than they want to admit. Instead, I asked one practical question. "Does he know you're married?" She hesitated. "Yes." Another pause settled between us. Then she added quietly, "He's married too." That detail shifted the situation slightly. Not emotionally, but structurally. The moment more than two people become involved, private problems start turning into something else entirely. I stood up from the table. "I'm going to take a walk," I said. Sarah didn't try to stop me. Outside, the neighborhood was moving through its normal weekday rhythm. Cars passing slowly. Someone mowing a lawn down the street. A dog barking behind a fence. I walked around the block once, letting the air clear my head. By the time I returned, Sarah was packing a small suitcase near the stairs. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said. That makes sense. Neither of us discussed what would happen next. But once something like this surfaces, the rest of the process tends to follow a predictable path. Over the next few weeks, things began shifting quietly from something personal into something official. I met with a lawyer. Sarah moved her belongings out of the house gradually. Not in a single dramatic moment, but over several afternoons while I was away or working. Documents appeared. Financial records, property agreements, and eventually, the paperwork that begins the formal end of a marriage. The strange part was how orderly everything became once the truth was out in the open. Like a project moving from speculation into planning. Because once everyone understands what actually happened, the rest becomes procedure. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. By then, most of the emotional noise had already settled. Lawyers handled the paperwork with the same detached efficiency they apply to any other case. Forms were filed. Accounts were divided. The house was listed and eventually sold. I signed the final documents in a quiet office downtown on a Tuesday afternoon. The entire appointment lasted less than 20 minutes. When it was finished, the lawyer slid the folder across the desk and said, "You're officially done." The phrasing struck me as oddly technical. Done. Like the closing of a project file. I thanked him, walked out of the building, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk watching traffic move through the intersection. The city looked the same as it had every other day. People crossing streets. Phones pressed to ears. Cars stopping and starting with the rhythm of the lights. Nothing about the world outside reflected the fact that a 7-year marriage had just ended inside a small office on the 3rd floor. A few weeks earlier, I had already moved out of the house. After Sarah relocated to her sister's place permanently, keeping the property didn't make much sense anymore. Too much space. Too many empty rooms that still held traces of routines that no longer existed. So I sold it. The new place was a smaller apartment closer to downtown Phoenix. 1 bedroom. Simple layout. Walking distance to a few restaurants and a grocery store. Practical. The kind of place that worked well for someone who spent half the year traveling. The first night there felt strange, but not in the way people usually imagine. It wasn't painful or dramatic. It was just quiet. Different quiet than before. In the evenings, I would sometimes sit near the window with a drink and think back to that morning when I returned from Seattle earlier than planned. Not the argument. Not the paperwork. Just the moment in the bedroom. 2 wine glasses sitting on the nightstand. One with a red lipstick mark. One clean. It was such a small detail. But sometimes small details are enough to change the direction of an entire life. And once you see them clearly, there isn't really a way to pretend you didn't notice. About a year later, I saw Sarah again. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. I had just finished a meeting with a client and stopped in for a quick espresso before heading to the airport. I noticed her the moment I walked in. She was sitting near the window with a laptop open in front of her, reading something on the screen. For a second, I wondered if she would notice me first, but then she looked up. Our eyes met across the room. Neither of us seemed surprised. A year is enough time for most of the sharper edges of a situation to dull. The anger fades. The questions lose their urgency. What remains is usually just the memory of how things ended. Sarah gave a small nod. Not an apology. Not a greeting. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we both recognized the other person. I nodded back. There wasn't anything left to say after that. No conversation that needed finishing. No explanation that would change the past. A few minutes later, I picked up my coffee and walked out toward the street. As I stepped into the sunlight, I found myself thinking again about that morning a year earlier. The quiet bedroom, the running shower, and the 2 wine glasses on the nightstand. Sometimes people spend years searching for the moment when their life changed. For me, it turned out that 2 glasses were enough. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.